Here.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Supposed to be up here.
the only man in the cannabis movement still rocking a mullet. The author of Cannabis Gateway to Health, the producer, publisher, and editor. Oh, sorry. Lifeline to the Future.
Hemp. Lifeline.
Hemp. See, I get confused. You all look alike to me. The author of Hemp, Lifeline to the Future. The publisher and editor of the West Coast Leaf Quarterly News Magazine, and an all-around hella cool man. Please welcome the one and only Chris Conrad.
Hello, Deep Green. Great to be here today, and I'm really glad to have you guys out here today to hone in on what we're talking about. I'm talking a little bit about hemp, but I'm really going to give a presentation in the back. If you haven't got your tickets for the panels in the back, I just heard a really great panel on children and the danger of parents having their children taken away from them because they use medical marijuana, the parents, that is, using medical marijuana. So there's a lot of really good information back there. You can still have a chance to get a ticket and get back and listen to some of the panels, which I highly recommend. And I use the word highly advisedly, shall we say. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today was on the hemp issue, but I do want to digress, if it's all right with you guys, before I go there, because, you know, I'm way behind on a lot of work I'm trying to get done, and it's because of two different things. The first thing is because tax day came along, and as Jerry Hanley there knows, taxes take a lot of people's time, and they might want to get a professional like him to help them with it. But moreover than that is that, you know, it just takes a certain amount of time. But what really happened was 2 weeks ago down in Oakland, the federal DEA came into Oaksterdam and raided a group of facilities that were connected to Richard Lee, the person who sponsored Proposition 19, your opportunity 2 years to vote to legalize marijuana here in California. The guy who sponsored it, the feds have targeted all of his businesses, and they're saying that it's because of tax violations. And the reason for the tax violation is because under the current federal law, they took these penalties for taxes, and they make it so that a business that works with marijuana, regardless of whether it's legal under state law or not, has to pay basically 2 or 3 times as much taxes as other businesses because they're not allowed to deduct the business expenses of running their organization. And so this has been a really big deal. Harborside is under danger of getting closed down by this whole thing. It's this 280E, I believe, of the tax code that we really need to get people working on that. And when you're paying your taxes this year, remember what they're using your taxes for, because a lot of that tax is going to suppressing the very freedoms that we have been raised that we are supposed to have as human beings in this country. And so as I said, so when they went to Oaksterdam, they also went into the Oaksterdam University, an institution of higher learning, and I use the word higher advisedly again, I guess. But because they had classes where they would teach patients how to make their own, how to grow their own marijuana and so forth, which is, of course, legal under state law. And they went into the Oaksterdam Cannabis Museum, which I'm the curator, because we had 6 plants growing in there. Now, the federal guidelines say they're not supposed to be even interested in cases where there's less than 50 plants. Or they're usually supposed to be looking for 100, 1,000 or more plants. Well, we had 6. And they were possessed by a patient under state law. They weren't even owned by the museum, and yet the feds still came in and took this. And this is under Obama, our good buddy Obama, that a lot of us spent time on the telephone, on the internet, working to get him elected a few years ago. And so one of the things I want to tell everybody is if you are planning on donating any money to Obama's campaign right now, I highly suggest that you disregard that notion, disabuse yourself of the notion that funding Obama's re-election campaign is helpful to you for 2 reasons. The first reason is because Obama is so much in the pocket of the corporations right now that he's got a base of funders that can give him millions of dollars at any shot. He doesn't really need our help anymore, and he's proved it by during his time of office. He's concentrated primarily upon helping out corporations, the insurance companies avoid their financial come-upons for what they've done to people and so forth, rather than working for the good of the people, although he came into office under the auspices of a lot of individuals giving him money out of our own pockets. I reached into my own pocket and gave Obama money because I believed what he said when he was running for office, such as, I will not use federal resources to go after medical marijuana in states where it's legal. When he spoke those words, I believed those words, and I donated money to his campaign, and I've seen that I wish I could get that money back. And that gives me the second reason of why you should reconsider giving any money to Obama's campaign this year, and that reason is Richard Lee needs that money for his legal defense fund. Americans for Safe Access needs that money to fight for your rights. Normal, MPP, the political groups that are doing the hard work that Obama had lied to us about, that Obama pretended that he was caring about, and to give it to the people who are really doing something about it. And so this is a time for you to not to think about pulling back from donating, but to think about where that money is going. Should it go to a drug warrior like Obama, or should it go to somebody like Richard Lee, a hero who took money out of his own pocket and put it on the ballot, the question of whether or not marijuana would be legal in California. And even though it barely passed, I mean, it didn't pass, it barely went down, the fact of its loss, we believe, is a big part of why Obama feels so encouraged to go ahead and to continue going after people. But I think Obama really needs to rethink that whole thing anyway, because Obama's got some things he needs to be concerned about. Like, for example, he himself, a former pot smoker, made the comment that, he inhaled, and that was the whole point of it, was to inhale when he was smoking marijuana, as opposed to Clinton, who pretended like he didn't inhale, and whether he did or not is a subject to debate. But nonetheless, Obama didn't even pull back on that. He said that he had inhaled and that he had done it repeatedly and that that was the point and so forth. And so the thing that has to be raised in all of our minds is, how much better off would Obama be if he had been arrested as a young man for marijuana, if he had lost his educational benefits, if he had been unable to get a job, if he had spent time in prison? How much better off would Obama have been if the very policies that he is enforcing had been waged against him? He would not be in the White House right now, I can tell you.
He'd be renting out pool floats in Honolulu.
What?
He'd be renting out pool floats.
As someone said, he'd be cleaning out pools in Honolulu right now instead of running this country and directing the drug war against sick and dying people and the people who provide them with medical marijuana. And farmers and the Indians in the Lakota reservation who are trying to grow hemp under a treaty that the United States forced them to sign 100 years ago. And they want to grow that hemp that we forced them to agree to grow, and Obama's DEA is stopping them from doing that. And then the other question for Obama is that he has 2 daughters. And that means these young women are going to grow up in a world of prohibition because he has failed and has embraced the politics of failures and has increased the funding for these very crimes against humanity that are known as the Drug Enforcement Administration and the federal drug policies. And so how is it going to benefit his daughters if they go to prison for marijuana? And how is it going to benefit him if their friends go to prison for marijuana? What exactly is Obama getting out of this, when 80% of the voters who supported him support legal medical marijuana, 70% of the overall population supports it, 50% of voters want marijuana legalized, and yet he's pushing against history to try to keep us back in the early 20th century, that pit of ignorance dominated by Harry Anslinger, and yet Obama can't even get us past that. So that's a good reason to think twice about donating to his campaign. Unfortunately, the best thing he's giving us to vote for him is that look how much worse his opponents are. And that kind of falls apart when you look at one number, that in 1 year there were more federal indictments for growing medical marijuana in the state of Montana alone than there were in 8 years under Bush in the entire country. Obama's Justice Department went after more people in one state in 1 year than G.W. Bush, whom I loathe, did in 8 years. So the idea that we're so much better off now is not as helpful as it could be. And I'm not saying that you should vote for somebody else. I'm just saying that we need to reach Obama and get him to realize this. And when he voted for industrial hemp as a senator, he should take that stand nowadays. Yes?
I don't mean to interrupt. I'm going to let you finish. I'm going to keep saying that till it gets funny again. Here's my question. I've always understood, at least on a political level, any sort of drug reform or cannabis legalization to be a second-term issue, such as it was with Arnold Schwarzenegger right before he left. He decriminalized marijuana pretty much. And at least it's a misdemeanor now. So it's harder to, you know what I'm saying? Or it's a ticket. It's an infraction, right? You know where I'm coming from? So do you think that there's a chance for that, or do you think that it's going to be even worse if he gets reelected?
Well, I'm not sure. I think we need to see what happens this summer.
And my other thing is, how do we as people impress upon him that he's losing votes because of this stance? I mean, we all admit that Mitt Romney is maybe not the best choice, but a lot of people will just be like, F it, I'm going to stay home because it's nothing. And my whole point is we got to make sure this is not the time to be apathetic. It's the time to bring more to it, more people voting for less drug laws and more progressive issues, if you may say it like that, to try to overwhelm them. What do you think? How would you speak on that?
Yeah, I think you hit upon a great point, Ngaio, which is that one of the things that we're looking as a campaign right now is that if Obama can't listen to logic, he doesn't get the politics, he doesn't understand the environment, he doesn't understand the science and the social justice and the medical issues around medical marijuana, that at a minimum, that maybe his wife will. And maybe it's time for us to be talking to Michelle Obama about this situation, because she knows as well as anybody else that his
Wow, you're just going to go right over his head to his old lady?
Yeah, go right
just
over
like that.
Hey, you try to get me to do something, talk to my wife. That could be true for him as well. And the other
maybe
thing, though,
maybe Michelle Obama could take it instead of childhood obesity. Maybe she could work for recreational drug law reform.
Good point. And we could also start doing other events like walkathons and so forth where we're in the public eye rather than just amongst ourselves. And this is a great example here, I believe, that we're reaching into the environmental movement and connecting it to the cannabis movement. The other thing I want to say, though, is that when you do get a solicitation to donate to Obama, go over to the California Normal desk and pick up one of the postcards that says, "We will support you when you start doing what you said on medical marijuana." And instead of sending him a check, send him a note, a postcard to say that, okay?
Let me ask you this, too, Chris, while I have you here. I mean, okay, look, I understand that there's a lot more. You just said there were way more arrests in Montana just this last year.
Actually, it was indictments.
Than in the whole country. But is it not also true that there were way more people growing marijuana in Montana? Because, okay, as a community, when the Ogden memo came out, we got time. When the Ogden memo came out, the medical cannabis movement exploded, right? All over Colorado, all over Montana. So it wasn't some quiet sort of thing. It was people standing in the streets, waving weed signs, cats on TV, bragging about how big their garden was and how much money they were going to make. Do you think, I mean, one of the things is marijuana becomes more and more mainstream. How do we do it without scaring off the straights and creating backlash, creating repercussions? Is there a way to be responsible for it? People are just going to go crazy all the time, or what? What do you think?
Well, that's a tricky question because
that's why I asked it.
You and your tricky questions, Ngaio.
That's me.
That's him. Do you do magic tricks too, by the way?
I do.
I had a funny
make
feeling
weed disappear.
Ah, right. And a puff of smoke, from what I remember.
Abra blunt dabra.
But that was that's a key point there, which was that Montana passed this law in 2004, and so under Bush, people were not as willing to be public about what they were doing. And then when Obama came into office with his statement about medical marijuana, people took that as a green light.
Man.
And it made a lot of stuff happen that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And you also bring up the other point, which is about responsibility. The problem with the responsibility issue is we can be responsible ourselves, but it's really hard to force other people to be responsible. And so when they've got the people out on the street corners waving those signs around, we might think, well, that doesn't seem like a good idea to me, but how do we stop the other person from doing it? That's the crux of the problem. When you have a political movement that's based upon people, each motivated by their own reason, some of them motivated by the idea of profit, and they're all supposedly working together on a cause for reform. So what you're talking about is an excellent example of why what ideally would happen is that a local government would set up zoning and controls over those kind of issues that would cause the backlash, and the federal government would go along with that. What we've seen instead is that places like Oakland, where they had their local policies, the federal government created their own local zoning policy, which they decided that Oakland isn't following the policy for cities that Washington, D.C. wants them to have, and so Washington, D.C. gets to dictate that policy and send in a goon squad to take down people who are complying with local policy instead of federal. And as long as we keep feeding this machine of the drug war, they're looking for ways to expand their power all the time. And so we need to be eroding that power, which kind of brings me to the issue of hemp again.
All right.
Because there's two things that international law says clearly that we can be doing. One of them is that we can allow for medical marijuana under international law, the Single Convention Treaty, Article 28, extremely clear on that. It's also clear that we can have industrial hemp. Well, we have medical marijuana and we see where it's going. We're making progress. We have to deal with irresponsible users as well as the people who are just bigots against it and everything. So there's a lot of complications on that because it's still a drug issue. But when you get to hemp, it's another kind of issue altogether. It's an issue about creating jobs in America that don't have anything to do with jobs, that have to do with the farmers of America creating new wealth for future generations and doing it in such a way that they use fewer toxic chemicals.
And those jobs don't leave the country.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't outsource a farm.
You can't outsource the farm.
I mean, you can, but it's not really cost effective.
Exactly. And so what we've been done instead, though, is we've outsourced the farming.
Right.
And so we have instead Canada's doing the farming for us. Holland is doing the farming for us.
China.
And China. The 500-pound gorilla, is that racist to say that about
Well, not
China?
about the Chinese.
Okay.
I mean, no, I don't know. Macroeconomically, for elephant in the room, you're mixing your metaphors.
Yeah, okay, so let's mix our metaphors on that and just say that China, the biggest producer of hemp in the world, is also the biggest consumer of hemp in the world, one of the most polluted countries in the world, and that's exactly why they think that hemp is the way that they have to go, because they've got so many toxic heavy metals in their soil at this point in a lot of China that they need to find a way to get that out again in order to return to growing food crops.
Hemp does that.
Hemp does that.
Wow, they're using that in Chernobyl to reclaim the land, aren't they?
Exactly.
Is there wild hemp growing out there?
Exactly.
Huh.
And likewise, it's a good way of controlling pests. For example, if you like potatoes, which who doesn't like potatoes?
No one doesn't like potatoes.
We would not have freedom fries if it were not for potatoes. I'll make that point clear. Well, I guess there's instant mashed potatoes. There's probably some way of, but even those are potatoes. The point is that there are these soil nematodes that attack potato plants, and if you grow potatoes in the same soil for too many years in a row, you can't do it anymore because the soil is so packed with eggs from these insects that the larvae destroy the roots of the plant. But if you go and grow hemp on that field, alternating with the potatoes, those nematodes can't even get in there. No poison sprayed on the ground, toxic metals removed, and then where do the toxic metals go? Well, they go into fiber, which is then used for building houses, building cars, making clothing, making textiles. It's not a good ultimate solution, but it diffuses it and it makes it into a situation better than eating it and so forth.
You're smart. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chris Conrad from the West Coast Leaf.
Make sure you read the West Coast Leaf.
Of Hemp
it's a
Lifeline
fun
to the
publication.
Future.
Thank you.
And now we